Every week, you throw away more potassium than most fertilizer bags deliver. You bag it up and put it at the curb. Then, you drive to the garden center and buy it back. My grandfather never threw a banana peel away. Not one. Every peel went into the garden. His tomatoes fruited until the first frost every single year, without one bag of purchased fertilizer. Not one bag in 40 years. I am going to show you exactly what he did, and the one mistake that makes this method fail for most people who try it. Before we talk about the method, you need to understand what is actually inside that peel. Not in scientific terms, in practical terms. What it does to a tomato plant that nothing else does the same way. The first thing is potassium. And I want you to understand what potassium actually controls in a tomato. Not leaf growth, not green color, not height. Potassium controls flower formation. It controls fruit development. It controls sugar content inside the fruit. It controls how well the plant resists disease under summer stress. Everything you are actually growing tomatoes for is controlled by potassium. Now think about every fertilizer bag you have ever bought. The numbers on the front are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in that order. Most general fertilizers are heavily weighted toward nitrogen. Nitrogen makes plants grow fast. It makes them look lush and impressive on a store shelf photo. Nitrogen makes leaves. Potassium makes tomatoes. Those are not the same thing. And nobody at the garden center ever explained that difference to you. A tomato plant that has been fruiting heavily for 6 weeks has used most of its potassium. The soil is depleted. The plant is running on empty. And nobody tells you to replenish it at that exact moment. The peel does that. Slowly, exactly where the roots are working, at the pace the plant can actually use. The second thing inside the peel is calcium. Calcium prevents blossom end rot, the black sunken patch on the bottom of a tomato that every gardener recognizes. It breaks your heart in July when you have been watching that fruit for 3 weeks. Most people buy a calcium spray when they see it. They spray the leaves. The leaves cannot absorb enough calcium to solve the problem. The roots can. A buried peel delivers calcium directly to the root zone. That is the difference between treating a symptom and preventing the cause. The third thing is magnesium. Magnesium is what makes chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is what makes photosynthesis possible. When you see yellow leaves on an otherwise healthy tomato plant in midsummer, that is almost always magnesium deficiency. Not disease, not overwatering. A mineral shortage that the peel addresses before the symptoms even appear. 3 nutrients: potassium, calcium, magnesium. All of them in a peel you were about to throw in the trash. The fertilizer bag never once mentioned any of this. And the reason is not complicated. You cannot patent a banana peel. You cannot put it in a bag with a label and sell it for $12. So it never made it into the brochure. It never made it into the extension pamphlet. It never made it onto the garden center shelf. It stayed in the kitchens and the barns of people who never needed a brochure to tell them what their grandfather had already shown them worked. Now, let me tell you about the preparation, because this is where most people who try this method fail before they even get to the garden. Most people who hear about burying banana peels go straight to the garden with a fresh peel from that morning's breakfast. They dig a hole, they drop it in, and they walk away feeling like they have done something good. And then, a week later, they have a slug problem they did not have before, or fruit flies hovering around the base of the plant, or something has been digging in that exact spot overnight. Fresh peels ferment in the soil. Fermenting organic matter has a smell. That smell is a signal that draws every pest in your garden toward that exact spot. Slugs follow it. Fungus gnats follow it. In some gardens, mice and voles follow it. You have not fed the tomato. You have set a table for everything that wants to eat the tomato. My grandfather dried his peels first. Every single time, without exception, he kept a flat wooden rack above the wood stove through the cool months. Every peel that came through the kitchen went on that rack. Within 3 to 4 days, the heat from the stove dried them completely. They went dark brown, almost black. They went paper thin and brittle. They crumbled if you bent them. In that dried state, they have no fermentation smell because there is no moisture left to ferment. You can bury a dried peel and nothing comes looking for it. And in warm, moist soil, a dried peel breaks down in 10 to 14 days. Fast enough to release nutrients before the plant has moved past the moment it needs them most. Slow enough that the release is gradual, rather than a single dump that the plant cannot absorb all at once. If you do not have a wood stove, a low oven does the same work. Set the oven to 200 degrees. Lay the peels flat on a baking tray, not overlapping. Leave them for 2 hours. Check them at the end. They should be dry, dark, and brittle. If they still feel soft or pliable, give them another 30 minutes. Once they are done, store them in a paper bag or a glass jar with a loose lid. Do not seal them airtight. They need to breathe, or they will reabsorb moisture from the air inside the container. A glass jar with the lid set on loosely, not screwed down, works well. My grandmother kept a jar of dried peels on the shelf beside the back door from October through the following May. By the time planting season arrived in spring, she had accumulated enough dried peels for every tomato, every pepper, every squash, and every cucumber plant on the property. 7 months of kitchen peels. An entire season of garden feeding, stored in a single glass jar. It cost her nothing but the 2 minutes it took to set each peel on the rack. Now let me walk you through both burial moments in detail, because the timing matters as much as the preparation. The first burial happens at transplant time, before the plant goes into the ground. You dig the planting hole the way you normally would for a tomato transplant. Then you dig it 4 more inches deeper than that. Tomatoes go in deep anyway. Most experienced gardeners bury the stem up to the lowest set of leaves because the buried stem forms additional roots. You are going 4 inches below where the root ball will sit. At the bottom of that extra depth, lay 1 dried peel flat. Just 1. Not 2, not a handful. 1 peel lying completely flat so it makes as much contact with the surrounding soil as possible. Then add 2 inches of plain garden soil on top of the peel before you set the root ball in. That 2-inch buffer is not optional. It keeps the peel separated from the tender young roots while the peel finishes breaking down. Once the peel has broken down completely, the nutrients it releases move upward and outward through the soil, and the roots find them naturally. My grandfather said it plainly. You are not feeding the plant. You are preparing the ground the plant is going to grow into. Let the ground do the feeding. That shift in thinking changes everything about how you approach the garden. The second burial happens at peak flowering. You will know this moment when you see it. The plant has been in the ground for 4 to 6 weeks. The first flowers have come and gone. Now the flowers are coming in clusters, multiple flower trusses developing at the same time. The plant is fully committed to production. This is the moment the potassium demand is highest. This is the moment most gardeners unknowingly let the plant down. They see the flowers, they feel satisfied, they do nothing. And 3 weeks later, the fruit starts coming in small, thin-walled, cracking at the shoulders, with no real sweetness to speak of. The potassium that was in the soil at planting has been used up. Nothing replaced it. The plant made the best fruit it could with what was left, which was not much. At this moment, 6 inches out from the stem, you dig down 6 inches. Not at the stem, 6 inches out from it, which is where the active feeding roots are working in the drip zone. Lay 1 dried peel flat at the bottom. Cover it with soil. Water it in thoroughly so the moisture begins activating the breakdown immediately. The peel releases its nutrients over the following 2 weeks, which is exactly the window when developing fruit most needs potassium to fill out properly, develop its cell walls fully, and accumulate the sugars that make a tomato worth growing. 2 peels for the entire season, 1 at planting, 1 at peak flowering. That is what my grandfather did every year without variation and without ever reading a soil science paper. He just knew what the plant needed and when it needed it, because he had watched tomatoes grow for 30 years and paid attention to what the plant was telling him. Now, let me tell you about the liquid version, because there are moments in a season when the plant cannot wait 2 weeks for a buried peel to break down. When you see blossom drop, when flowers are opening but not setting fruit, when the lower leaves are yellowing in the middle of July on a plant that looked perfectly healthy in June, those are signs the plant needs potassium now. My grandmother made banana peel tea for exactly this situation. She kept a clay crock near the back door throughout the growing season. It was always there, always working, always ready. Every peel that came into the kitchen went into the crock. She covered the peels with water and left the crock to sit for 3 full days. By the end of the 3rd day, the water had turned a deep amber brown. It smelled faintly sweet with a fermented edge to it. The nutrients from the peels had soaked into the water. She strained the liquid through an old cloth into a clean watering can and poured it slowly and evenly around the base of each tomato plant, 1 quart per plant. Always in the morning before the heat of the day set in. The reason for morning application was simple. She wanted the liquid to carry down into the root zone before the sun could evaporate any of it from the soil surface. The potassium in that liquid is already partially broken down by 3 days of soaking. The plant can access it within hours rather than weeks. You get the benefit of the peel in a fraction of the time. My grandmother applied this tea once every 2 weeks from the moment the plants set their first flowers through the end of the season. She never measured precisely. A handful of peels to a gallon of water, soaked for 3 days, strained and poured. That was the whole recipe. The plants that received it regularly produced into October on a farm in a county where most gardens were finished before the end of August. Every year the neighbours would come by in late September and see tomatoes still coming off the vine and ask what she was doing differently. She always told them exactly what she did. She never held anything back. Most of them listened, nodded, and then went home and kept doing what they had always done. That is the thing about simple methods. People respect complicated things they paid money for. They trust a label and a price tag. They overlook simple things that cost nothing because they cannot believe free could possibly work as well as expensive. 40 seasons of tomatoes on this farm say otherwise. Now, let me talk about what happens to the soil itself over time when you use this method consistently, because this is the piece that nobody in the commercial gardening world wants to discuss with you. When you bury organic matter in living soil, you are not just adding nutrients. You are feeding the community of organisms that make soil productive in the first place. Bacteria, fungi, earthworms, nematodes, protozoa, billions of organisms per handful of healthy soil, all of them working to break down organic matter and convert it into forms plant roots can absorb. When you bury a banana peel in that soil, those organisms go to work on it. They multiply as they feed. More organisms means more biological activity. More biological activity means better soil structure. Soil with good structure has spaces and channels that let water penetrate deeply rather than running off the surface. It has pathways that let roots move freely in any direction without hitting compacted layers. It holds nutrients in stable forms instead of leaching them away with every rain. It stays loose and workable with no effort because the organisms living in it are constantly turning and aerating it from below. My grandfather's garden had soil that looked and smelled different from everything around it. I noticed this as a boy without knowing why. The soil in his tomato beds was dark, almost black. It held its shape when you squeezed a handful but broke apart easily when you let it fall. And it had a smell, rich, deep, alive. The smell of old forest ground that has been building for 100 years without anyone disturbing it. That smell is geosmin. It is produced by actinobacteria, a group of soil organisms that thrive in biologically active soil. You smell geosmin after rain on healthy ground. Farmers have always known that smell means good soil, even before anyone had a name for it. My grandfather's bed smelled like that all season, every year, not just after rain, because the biology in that ground was continuous and active and well-fed. Commercial fertilizer does not produce that smell. Commercial fertilizer bypasses the soil biology entirely and delivers nutrients directly to the plant in soluble form. This is efficient in the short term. In the long term, it is destructive. The soil organisms that are not being fed by organic matter slowly starve. Their populations decline. The biological activity in the soil drops. The structure begins to break down. The soil compacts. Water starts running off instead of soaking in. Nutrients leach away instead of being held in stable biological forms. And the garden needs more fertilizer every year just to produce the same result it produced the year before. The gardener buys more bags. The company sells more bags. Nobody ever points out that the bags are the reason the bags are necessary. My grandfather's garden became more productive every decade, not because he added more inputs every year, because he was building the soil biology rather than depleting it. He was making the ground itself more capable rather than making the ground more dependent. The plain folk understood this without needing it explained to them in a university course. It was simply what you did. You returned what you took. You fed the ground, and the ground fed the plant. The fertilizer industry built a multi-billion-dollar business on breaking that one relationship, on convincing 3 generations of American gardeners that the ground needed their product instead of needing the kitchen scraps they were already throwing away. Now, let me bring all of this together into the complete system as I practice it on this farm today. I dry every peel that comes through the kitchen from the 1st of April through the end of November. 2 hours at 200 degrees in a low oven, or a few days on a rack if I have the patience. The dried peels go into a glass jar with a loose lid on the shelf near the back door. At transplant time, usually the 2nd week of May on this farm, 1 dried peel goes 4 inches below the root ball of every tomato transplant with 2 inches of soil as a buffer between the peel and the roots. Every 2 weeks from the time the plants set their first flowers through the end of August, I make a batch of peel tea. A good handful of fresh or dried peels in a gallon of water, soaked for 3 days, strained through an old cloth, 1 quart poured around each plant in the morning before the heat arrives. When the heavy flowering begins, which on this farm is usually in the 1st week of July, 1 more dried peel goes into the drip zone 6 inches from the stem of each plant, 6 inches down, covered with soil, watered in. That is the complete system. 3 interventions across the whole growing season. A peel buried at planting to prepare the soil the roots are growing into. Tea applied every 2 weeks during the active producing period to maintain the potassium supply as the plant uses it. A 2nd peel buried at peak flowering to support the fruit that is about to develop. The cost of this system across an entire season is the time it takes to dry the peels and soak them. That is all. Not $1 spent. Not one trip to the garden center for this specific purpose. My grandfather did not have a name for what he was doing, and he never needed one. He watched his plants, and he watched his soil, and he did what his father had shown him worked, and what 40 seasons confirmed was right. The research eventually caught up to most of what he knew. The commercial industry has not mentioned it and will not, because a garden that runs entirely on kitchen scraps and a clay crock of rainwater does not buy anything from anyone. And that is exactly the kind of garden I want to help you build. Starting with the peel from this morning's banana, do not throw it away. Set it on a tray and put it in a low oven for 2 hours. In 2 hours it will be ready, and your tomato plants will use everything in it more completely, more efficiently, and more lastingly than anything you could buy at the garden center or order online. On this channel, I try to pass along what plain people always knew, and what the rest of the world is slowly and sometimes painfully coming back around to find. If that is the kind of knowledge you come here for, subscribe and stay close, because next time I am going to show you what my grandfather added to that same planting hole, alongside the banana peel that doubled the tomato yield in the season. He first tried it. One ingredient, already in your kitchen, has been sitting within 10 feet of your garden the whole time you have been driving to buy fertilizer. Tell me in the comments what state you are gardening in, and whether blossom end rot or thin, tasteless fruit has been your biggest tomato struggle this season. I read every one of them, and sometimes your question becomes the next video. I am Samuel Byler. I will see you in the next one.